Yeah, fine. So I will try to give you some idea about biodiversity reporting and monitoring in Austria. In general, of course, with a focus on the aspects of it that we are doing here in the Environment Agency Austria and in particular in my team. On the content, a brief introduction, mainly about biodiversity in Austria, then some words about the reporting of biodiversity and the monitoring of biodiversity. I will try to give you a summary and an outlook, and then I'm looking forward to a discussion. So this is now this introduction section, and let me start with just some almost random parameters about biodiversity in Austria. For sure, not good indicators for monitoring biodiversity, but I think it's still a nice framing. So in our national red lists of biotope types, we differentiate 488 different biotope types. We have about 68,000 species of plants and animals, thereof 750 endemics, and almost 29% of the country is covered by protected areas. Some of these numbers we will get a little bit more information throughout my talk. And we are a rather heterogeneous country, and this is the reason why these numbers are comparably high for a smaller country at our latitude in Central Europe. You will see throughout the talk sometimes nice alpine flowers, but that's just by chance because I was with a very good photographer in the mountains 2 weeks ago. In generally, the hotspots of biodiversity in Austria are more in the lowlands, in the eastern lowlands especially. The status is not as nice as it could be. Our main tool for assessing the status are the red lists, and on the right side you see a chart that should show you how much of vertebrate species are endangered. These are the gray parts of these taxa. This is already rather old, but we started recently with a new series of red lists, new red lists and updates of red lists. But this should just show you the status is somehow average, I would say. And the reasons, of course, are pressures that are not very different from pressures at global level. You remember all the IPBES global assessment or other EU member states. Main issues are habitat loss due to land use change and in terms of agricultural land, both sides, intensification on the one side and abandonment of extensive grazing or mowing areas on the other side. We have big pressure from urbanization and infrastructure, and also hydrological changes, especially drainage of wetlands and wet meadows. River regulation is still an issue. And of course, also pressures related to invasive alien species and climate change, both maybe even stronger in aquatic environments than in purely terrestrial environments. As all or most of the CBD parties, I see some comments, a few, yeah. Nice, we can speak about hunting then also in the discussion. Of course, this was just because there was a comment about hunting as a pressure. This was just really the really big issues according to some assessments that we did. We have a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, like most or almost all CBD parties, and this is in place since the end of 2022. It should cover the period 22 until 2030, and it contains a 10-point key program, 100 specific targets, more than 400 measures, and of course parameters for evaluation and relevant actors. But it's not limited to these mentioned actors. In fact, the implementation is a task of all sectors, actors, and citizens. And based on these parameters for evaluation, we also derived a set of headline indicators. Another tool that we have for nature conservation is a recent study using systematic conservation planning. We compiled data sets for more than 2,600 different endangered or protected habitat types or species. And you see at the bottom the outcoming map. That's just the hotspots. It's species richness, species numbers. And as mentioned, you see here in the eastern lowlands, in the Pannonic climatic area, there are the main hotspots. But then we applied two different tools. One was a systematic conservation planning algorithm that beside the absolute number of species richness also considered the complementarity of these species assemblages in the grid cells. And in a second step, we marked existing strictly protected areas, wilderness areas and national parks, and pre-selected them so to see what would be the next most important areas. And in the east, close to Vienna, and the national park of Danube floodplains and Neusiedler Seewinkel in the east Hungarian border, there are quite some further hotspots, but also there are some little hotspots in the southeast of Austria, in the southern Alps, Karawanken on the Slovenian border, and in the west, in particular Inn Valley, Lech Valley, and Rhine Valley. So far, my introduction, that you get some first idea about biodiversity pattern in Austria. Now about the reporting, and it's reporting obligations that we have because of international and EU-wide obligations. These include reports to the CBD, Article 17 reporting for the Habitats Directive, Article 12 reporting for the Birds Directive, the EU State of Nature report. There we contribute via the European Topic Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystems, Water Framework Directive. There is Article 24 of the Alien Species Regulation, and now also nature restoration plans for the nature restoration regulation. That's all related to international or EU obligations. And at the national level, we also have some obligations. For the Austrian Parliament, we are producing every 3 years the Environmental Control Report, Umweltkontrollbericht, and we evaluate sectoral policies like the mentioned biodiversity strategy, like climate adaptation strategy, like the Austrian plan for the common agricultural policy. And we are producing red lists, and we have a set of headline biodiversity indicators for status and trends of biodiversity. And of course, also endemic species are an issue that we are dealing with and reporting from time to time. The three that are here marked in bold, Habitats Directive, red lists, and status and trends of biodiversity, I will speak now a little bit more about it. And I start with the Habitats Directive. So you see here the last assessment. It's the one which is already 7 years old. This is because the recent one, the data are available, but it's not yet published in a consolidated version by the responsible authorities, which are in Austria, the federal states. So I cannot show these slides sorry, I just see your comments. I'm looking forward to discuss all this then later on. Thank you. Yeah, so that's from the period 12 to 18. And you see 18% of the assessments for habitats and 14% of the assessments for species show favorable conservation status. These are rather low values. And on the right side, you see that there is some kind of gradient from rather untouched habitats to heavily affected ones like freshwater and peat bogs. The more affected, of course, also the conservation status is on average worse of these conservation targets of the habitats and the species. When we look at the trends, and here I have now also the rightest 4 bars in green, yellow, red, and gray. They are then now the assessment of the news period. There we have a general impression that it didn't change much. It didn't change much between the first period of 2001 to 6 until the recent period, 19 to 24. Maybe the orange bars dropped a little bit because this is partly related due to better data availability. Yeah, no strong changes. At the habitats, the green bar increased a little bit also, from 13 to 23%. On the red lists, there was a period where red lists, it was difficult to get funding for red lists at the federal level, but we set up now a new regime with determined intervals. We published several red lists, and currently all the red lists for vertebrates, mainly bats, other mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and fish, but also some other are really close to be finished. And we are also in close exchange with responsible authorities, in this case the ministry, to work on those ones which have quite some delay already, and to produce updates on new red lists. We also developed a red list index according to the international standards, and this shows you the endangerment of the species. 0 would mean that all the species are regionally extinct of a group of organisms like fish or amphibians, and 1.0 would mean that they are all unthreatened. And yeah, you see the pattern. It's stable until slightly increasing, but when we assess the different species, when we check what really happens in terms of changes, then it's normally very particular species that improved, and the vast majority of the species remain constant in conservation status. We have in preparation a really nice dashboard. It should be published in summer, where you can follow up all kind of red list stati of the different species, global, European, EU, Austrian, from parts of Austria, like Austrian federal states, but also from some neighboring countries of subnational units like Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, South Tyrol, Czech Republic, Slovakia. And yeah, I'm looking forward that we finish it, and then all these kind of trends are also visible for single species, for subgroups of species, and so on. Now I come to this third kind of reporting, status and trends. This is based on a set of 43 biodiversity indicators that we developed, both based on international guidelines and with a focus on the aims and evaluation parameters of the Austrian National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. And other criteria were data availability, of course, so it was not an exclusion criterion. We also included biodiversity indicators where still data are lacking, but if they were considered very important, we included these indicators in the set in order to have also some kind of tool or pressure to make data available or get them collected. Other things were, for instance, possibilities for citizen science was also a criterion here. And we have 3 categories: pressure, status, and response. So compared to the driver's pressure, status, impact, response model, we skipped the drivers and the impacts and focused on these 3. And the 43 indicators are almost balanced across these 3 categories. I will not show you all of them, but some rather few examples. This, for instance, is land consumption. So this includes sealed land, but also consumed land by, for instance, gardening, by infrastructure for tourism or recreation, like golf courses and so on. And there we have a political aim to reduce it for 2.5 hectares per day as the land consumption parameter. So the new consumption per day should not be more than 2.5 hectares. And currently we are at a level of like 6.7, 6.5. It's reducing, but it's additional consumption. So it's not that the consumed land gets less and less with this declining line. It's just that the additional consumption per year or per day gets a little bit less compared to 10 years ago. That's one of the pressure indicators, of course. Deadwood is more like a status indicator. And you see here that it's increasing in the Austrian managed forests, increasing if you look at the overall number in red from about 10 cubic meters per hectare in the year 2000 and up to 14.4 in the most recent survey from 2016 until 21. So with forest indicators, of course, there are more than this one. In general, there is a slightly increasing trend in most of them. Not so with the woodland bird index. It's declining since 98, whereas we had a continuous data set all the time available for the farmland bird index. With the woodland bird index, BirdLife did lots of work, but it was not published every year. And now recently BirdLife Austria and the Forest Research Center, BFW, they published together the woodland bird index for the last 26 years. And you see slightly decreasing trend from 98 until 2024. But it's still quite better than the farmland bird index, which dropped in the same interval from 100 index points to about 56. I think it was last year that we had 56. And here it's at least a little bit more. Another status and trend indicator that we use are alpine pastures, which are particularly nice and also biodiversity rich environment. And you see here in this chart that they are declining almost to the half, not exactly to the half, but almost in the last 25 years. And we also have an indicator dealing with the species richness of these alpine pastures. And this is based on a monitoring program that we are running. And you see the overall sampling of this monitoring. I will speak about it later a little bit more on the right lower panel. And all these triangles in brown, they are alpine pastures and species richness in the test areas for grasshoppers, plants, and butterflies. I would say they're constant. Statistically seen, they are constant. There is no significant change. If you watch at the numbers, if you take a more careful look at the numbers, you see that there are slight increases, but they are not statistically significant. Slight increases from survey 17-18 versus the survey 23-24. This refers only to these brown triangles, not to the overall set. And last but not least, protected areas in Austria. Of course, you're aware of the 30% target that we have at international level and at EU level. We are almost there. We are close to 30%. But when we have a look at the level of protection in these protected areas, then there are quite many of them covering quite much territory where the protection level is rather low. So IUCN 5 or 6. And strictly protected areas, we have only 3% of the Austrian territory covered. And now the very last thing on the status and trends parameters, biodiversity enhancement by the Common Agricultural Policy in Austria. We have a program called ÖPOL, and although the program and its measures and bundles of measures changed across the CAP periods, you see here what is supposed to be biodiversity relevant measures under the CAP from 2015 until 2023. And in the recent period, there is an increase from about more or less 150,000 hectares up to 210,000 hectares. So far for these reporting elements that I want to share with you, I come now to a part related to monitoring of biodiversity in Austria. And the aims are not only biodiversity Austria, biodiversity monitoring aims in Austria, but in general, I think these three aims can be always derived from a good biodiversity monitoring program. The one is, this is normally what policymakers, and often they are the same as the funders, are interested in, is to evaluate the performance of the policies. For this, often parameters, indicators can change, and these policies are hardly longer than 6 or 10 years in place. If you think, for instance, about CAP periods or biodiversity strategy periods. Then, of course, such monitoring should produce long-term time series for assessing long-term trends beyond the validity of such specific policies, and to make data available for specific research or a backbone for any kind of research projects dealing with biodiversity, especially larger spatial or temporal scales. In Austria, we have many biodiversity monitoring programs. I will present you briefly the one we have in place for the Habitats Directive, and another one which is dealing with farmland biodiversity monitoring called ÖBM Kulturlandschaft. In our house, we are also working on functional connectivity of ecological corridors with camera traps in corridors all across Austria. And an Austrian biodiversity fund was established in 22-23, and there was a relevant call for monitoring projects that were undertaken 23 to 25 to fill gaps, mainly to fill gaps in knowledge and data, with the little issue that, of course, in 2-3 years of fieldwork, you cannot really do a monitoring, but you can generate a baseline, or you can replicate surveys that were undertaken in the very past. But I will focus now on these first two. And for the Habitats Directive, there is the monitoring under Article 11 in place in Austria. And we have these 4 reporting periods, 2001, 2006, 2012. And the last was 18 to 24. And the monitoring was in place in this 2012 until 2018 period. And we had in the monitoring program then 38 species and 31 habitats. And in the second monitoring period, which was dealing with the last reporting period, we had slightly more species and habitats in place considered in the monitoring. How does it work? We as Environment Agency Austria, we get contracted by the 9 Austrian federal states, and some of the conservation targets, the habitat types and species, we are monitoring ourselves, but most we are doing by subcontracting bureaus and field mappers. And it was quite some effort for the monitoring period 16 until 18. So the last one, the most recent one, I don't have this data yet. We had more than 5,000 test areas. almost 5,000 plots, where also structure and function was taken up, 140 persons involved in more than 1,600 working days, and that's quite much, at least for a country of the size of Austria. The second monitoring program that I want to briefly show you is ÖBM. ÖBM stands for Austrian Biodiversity Monitoring, Österreichisches Biodiversitätsmonitoring, Kulturlandschaft. It's a farmland biodiversity monitoring. It started in the year 2017, and the aim was to monitor status of biodiversity in Austrian cultural landscape. And focus is on the national scale, and yeah, we included these already once mentioned alpine pastures, but we excluded the forests, and our statistical population for which we are representative with our sample are all 1 square kilometer grids in Austria with more than 50% farmland. So if there are tiny farmland patches somewhere in the middle of forest, then this is not considered. Because of the sampling, it would not work there well. And we have field surveys combined with remote sensing, and recently also with metabarcoding exercise. And it was built up upon a pioneer work 10 years earlier that you see here in the arable northeast of Austria, the yellow dots. This was a program called Peanuts with 100 test areas. And in 2017, we complemented those ones to get over-representativeness for Austria all across the country, from east to west, and also all the altitude covered, or the altitudes covered. Random sample in Austria looks like this. You get intensively used agricultural areas, you get meadows, you get high mountain pastures, you get steep slopes, and you get some parcels with animals. That's just briefly that you have an idea when I present some results later how it is working. So we have these 625 times 625 test areas, 200 of them, and in those there are 10 test circles where we survey vascular plants, butterflies, and grasshoppers. And the entire test area, the biotop mapping takes place. So I show you only results for plants. It's a little bit messy, this chart, because we have a different sample for 2007 and 8. These were these yellow dots in the map. There is the sample size 100, and for 2017 and 18 and 23, 24, we have 200 test areas, and we can only compare across those that were yellow. Sorry, I switched back to the map. We can compare across the 100 yellow ones. These are the blue bars, and we can compare across the 100 other ones. These are the olive bars, and we can compare the entire sample. But the entire sample and the olive ones, we only can compare 17, 18, and 23, 24, because in 2007, 2008, we don't have any data for that. In any case, what we see, the only significant change is an increase in plant species richness per test area between, and I refer now to the second bar on the right panel, between the third and the first survey with the 100 yellow ones in the arable northeast of Austria. There we have an increase of 8 species of plants. But when we have a deeper look, we see that this increase is mainly based on alien plant species. So for alien plant species, we have a significant increase from 2007 until 2023. Also, this is the second bar again. Also, we have one for 17, 18 until 23, 24. And also for the overall sample in gray, we have a significant increase in invasive alien plants. That's the rightmost gray bar between 2017, 18 and 23, 24. When we watch on the left side, the native plant species, we have only one significant increase, and this is 3 plants, 3.5 plant species per test area when comparing 2007-8 with 23-24. I will go through all the questions after the talk. Okay, I will finish in 10 minutes, and then we still have time for this. Of course, yes, I'm happy to answer these questions and to discuss the things with you and how it's done in other member states and in Germany. So this is just a spatial pattern of these changes that I just showed you. And honestly, for my disappointment, the spatial pattern are not very clear. On the left upper panel, only in red, you see the species richness of the most recent run of the plants. There you see some kind of pattern. But then when it's about the changes in the other 3 charts, the pattern is not so clear. So it's not clearly the case that in one part of Austria the change is very positive, in one other the changes are negative, and this gives a clear picture. In general, of course, because the overall change is positive, we get more species. This we see also in these charts, and the neophytes, so the invasive alien plant, are increasing almost everywhere. But on the top right and left bottom picture, which is native species, there you see a mixture of these blue dots where species richness is decreasing, with red dots where they are increasing. But this is just to mention that we also started meta barcoding pilot at the same 200 test areas, but not sampled on all 10 test circles, only in one of them. And we found it's not totally analyzed yet, but we got some first data for 40 sites already, and the others should be ready soon. Let me try to summarize the situation of reporting and monitoring in Austria. The monitoring landscape, with monitoring landscape, I mean the kind of programs, how they, who is doing them, how they are designed, and so on. They evolved historically, and there is a high diversity of organizations, individuals, and also biodiversity variables. And in general, it's project-oriented, not huge long-term programs, but bits and pieces. And the funding is also project-oriented. And this results, of course, in some challenges, which are coherent integration of biodiversity data from various monitoring programs, gaps and duplication of efforts, or gaps on one side, duplication on the other side, high dependence on project-specific and time-bound funding sources. So it's hard to effectively design a monitoring for the next 15, 20 years if you have funding for 3 years and you don't know what will happen afterwards. The fourth bullet point here, intransparent and delayed documentation and publication of data, because there is not an established workflow for each project and program. It works differently. And insufficient networking between stakeholders, spatial levels, and sectors. And at the very first exercise that should help to deal with these challenges, it will not solve them, but help to deal with it. We are currently undertaking an inventory of all these monitorings and reporting obligations, and how they match with each other and how they match with indicators. And my original aim was to bring a little bit more of this in my talk, but it's not ready yet, and I can't do so. What I said now, I try now also to bring in a chart. So we see here funding and financing, conceptualizing, monitoring, which means more or less the field work, data analyzing and visualization and reporting. So like a workflow, how you come from funding that you need until the reporting. And at the level of the specific monitoring programs, it's the case that funding and financing normally comes from the federal ministries and from the federal states, partly also from scientific funds. Then there are any kind of contractors, partly with subcontractors, who are doing concepts until data analysis. And then there is a reporting that is partly a duty of the contractors or partly duty of the authorities. And examples, the Habitats Directive, Article 11 monitoring that I showed you, it's federal states as funders, Environment Agency Austria, we as contractors, and we have then subcontractors. Or for the Birds Directive, the federal states, they fund BirdLife, and BirdLife works with volunteers. Or for these farmland biodiversity monitoring ministries are funding us, and we are then working with subcontractors, and so on and so forth. And then is also the synthesis level, which is trying to make some kind of reports like the mentioned evaluation of the National Biodiversity Strategy, the CBD report, the status and trends report, and so on. And that's again a little bit different, but not yet well established. But important to be efficient also at this level. An outlook, and I want to start the outlook with the big game changer. So all what I showed you until the summary was like status quo in Austria the last 10 years, I would say. It didn't change much. Now comes the game changer, EU Nature Restoration Regulation. And I think the following 3 bullet points are the main changes. First, there is an even increased relevance of the Article 11 monitoring for the Habitats Directive, because those data collected there are the baseline for Article 4 of the Nature Restoration Regulation, and the baseline of what needs to be restored in all member states. Second, we have the start of the PoMS implementation, and PoMS is a really intensive monitoring. We have in Austria to cover 80 sites with 1 transect per site. I think in Germany it's 90. So we have almost as many sites as you have. So it's, I think, 980 times that it needs to be done, because we have 4 groups of organisms, and yeah, they need to be done in different times. You cannot just walk into the wild bees and the hoverflies at the same time. You need to walk twice. And we have these 80 sites, and probably 6 months, April to October, or April to September, where we'll have to implement it. And the third thing is that there's also much increased relevance of the other indicators that are part of the Nature Restoration Regulation. For instance, grassland butterfly index, forest bird index, woodland farmland bird index, woodland bird index, and so on. So it's even stronger need for coordination, and with this historically evolved monitoring projects and programs, it doesn't work anymore well. And we hope that we will come towards a biodiversity monitoring coordination center similar to the German one. It is mentioned in the Austrian government program that is in place since 1 year, but this first year was very difficult to kick this off, and in fact we did not manage to kick it off. But we thought about what this biodiversity monitoring center should do, and we are also quite involved in the Biodiversity Plus. So this is mainly based on the Biodiversity Plus strategic biodiversity monitoring document. Coordination and concept development, capacity building and maintenance. Very important also for IOPOMS, for instance. The capacity building is a capacity for identifying all these kind of pollinators is a limiting factor in very many member states. Data management and exchange, data interpretation and reporting, science communication, and securing long-term funding. So probably for you in the German monitoring center, that's not a surprise. This is your homework. Yeah, but this would be the set of objectives that we could foresee also for Austrian Biodiversity Monitoring Center. And we have a vision for the Austrian Biodiversity Monitoring, which is that it's internationally and nationally coordinated and harmonized, that it makes high quality biodiversity information from monitoring available and usable, for instance, for targeted conservation strategies and measures, that it enables the derivation of policy relevant indicators, that it overlays biodiversity data with human cost drivers or pressures of biodiversity loss, that this causality gets tackled with this, that it pools and efficiently uses resources and expertise, and that it secures that it is secured with regards to financing and long-term planning. That's like the wish list, the vision, and we hope will come through soon or later. And also here a chart that should show not exactly this vision, but should show something similar at the European level and the national level. So I think I can already mention that next week in this series of lectures, my colleague Hugo Rivera will speak, who is coordinating the currently taking place pilot of EPOC. EPOC is the EU Biodiversity Observation Coordination Center, and we are running with the Finnish and the French agency and other partners currently a pilot for the European Commission. And there should be this European level coordination center with thematic hubs, because it's not needed always to intermingle marine mammals with terrestrial habitats. It's good to have also some separation and clear topics. And also at the national level in the member states, there could be national monitoring coordination centers that then are particularly focused on the kind of habitats and organisms which are relevant at the national level. So for Austria, it won't be any marine mammals, for instance. Fine. I finished with this, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Contact details.
Thanks